Okay, today we're going to be reading chapter 12 of Tom Sawyer. In your book, the title is The Cat and the Painkiller. This is a really famous chapter. Oftentimes, you'll see this chapter kind of pulled out from the rest of the book and either read as a short story or maybe even adaptations of the story. But it's a pretty important one, not necessarily for the flow of the story, but because it's just pretty famous and most people know about Tom Sawyer and the Painkiller. So, we'll go ahead and get started. Just as a brief review, yesterday's chapter, chapter 11, is where Tom is really kind of battling with his conscience about what he should do. He knows he's witnessed a murder, and that's a pretty big deal, but he also knows that he's going to be in deep trouble if he tells anyone and Injun Joe finds out. So today's chapter is a little more lighthearted, but we will get back to the storyline a little bit. So here we go. Chapter 12. One of the reasons why Tom's mind had drifted away from its secret troubles was that it had found a new and weighty matter to interest itself about. Becky Thacker had stopped coming to school. Okay, so all of a sudden he's no longer worried about what happened in the graveyard. He's now worried about why Becky's not coming to school. Tom had struggled with his pride for a few days and tried to whistle her down the wind, meaning kind of forget about her, but it failed. He began to find himself hanging around her father's house nights and feeling very miserable. She was ill. What if she should die? There was distraction in that thought. He no longer an interest in war or even see the whole life on nothing dreariness left for again his boy-like obsession with this girl. He put his hoop away and his bat. There was no joy in them anymore. His aunt was concerned. She began to try all manner of remedies on him, or medicine, basically. She was one of those people who are infatuated with medicines and the newfangled methods of reduced health or mending it. She was an inveterate experimenter in these things. When something fresh in this line came out, she was in a fever right away to try it on herself, for she was never ill, but on anybody else that it came handy. She was a subscriber for all the health periodicals or newspapers and phrenological frauds, and the solemn ignorance they were inflated with was breath to her nostrils. All the rot they contained about ventilation and how to go to bed and how to get up and what to eat and what to drink and how much exercise to take and what frame of mind to keep oneself in and what sort of clothing to wear. This was all gospel to her, and she never observed that her journals of the current month customarily upset everything they had recommended the month before. She was as simple-hearted and honest as the day was long, and so she was an easy victim. She gathered together her quack periodicals and her quack medicines, and thus armed with death, went about on her pale horse, metaphorically speaking, with hell following after. But she never suspected that she was not an angel of healing and the balm of Gilead in disguise to the suffering neighbors. Okay, so here, basically, what it's describing is Aunt Polly is one of those people that jumps on the bandwagon whenever a new medicine or a new cure for something is found. If they're recommending something new, she's going to try it. And then I really like what it says here. She never observed that her health journals of the current month customarily upset everything they had recommended the month before, which is kind of the same thing we see nowadays, right? Like one month they're recommending this, the next month they find out that's actually not what this actually not helpful. It actually causes other problems and such and such. So whenever anything new came out, she had everything she needed. She would believe it wholeheartedly. She would get all the new medicines, and then she would try it out on anybody that needed her quote unquote help. The water treatment knew now, and Tom's low condition was a windfall to her. She had him out at daylight every morning, stood up in the woodshed, and drowned him with a deluge of cold water. Then she scrubbed him down with a towel like a file, and so brought him to. Then she rolled him up in a wet sheet and put him away under blankets till she sweated his soul clean, and the yellow stains of it came through his pores, as Tom said. So, one of these new cures that Aunt Polly was trying was the water treatment. Okay, which I guess had just been discovered. They had just published it. And so she's now trying it on Tom because Tom is acting funny. He seems to be depressed, and she thinks maybe he's sick and she's going to try and cure him of it however she can. Yet, notwithstanding all this, the boy grew more and more melancholy and pale and dejected. She added hot baths, sitz baths, shower baths, and even plunges. But the boy remained as dismal as a hearse. She began to assist the water with a slim oatmeal diet and blister plasters. She calculated his capacity as she would a jug's and filled him up every day with quack cure-alls. She was trying medicine after medicine after medicine, but nothing was working. Tom had become indifferent to persecution by this time. This phase filled the old lady's heart with consternation or worry. All of a sudden, Tom stops caring about anything she tries to do to him, which is worries Aunt Polly because normally he has quite the opinion about her quote unquote cure. Well, this indifference must be broken up at any cost. Now, she had heard of painkiller for the first time. She ordered a lot at once. She tasted it and was filled with gratitude. It was simply fire in liquid form. Basically, if you've ever tasted a really horrible cough syrup, that's what she's describing. She dropped the water treatment and everything else and pinned her face to the painkiller. She gave Tom a teaspoonful and watched the deepest anxiety for the results. Her troubles were instantly at rest, her soul at peace again. For all of a sudden, the indifference was broken up. The boy could not have shown a wilder, heartier interest if she had built a fire under him. Tom felt that it was time to wake up. This sort of life might be romantic enough in his blighted condition, but it was getting to have too little sentiment and too much distracting variety about it. So all of a sudden, Tom realizes, you know what? I gotta stop acting like this. I can't be depressed about this girl. Life is too exciting. So he thought over various plans for relief and finally hit upon that of professing to be fond of the painkiller. All of a sudden, he's going to start claiming that he loves the painkiller. It's so good. Thank you, Aunt Polly. Give me more. He asked for it so often that he became a nuisance or an annoyance, and his aunt asked him to help himself and quit bothering her. If it had been Sid, she would have no misgivings to alloy her delight. But since it was Tom, she watched the bottle clandestinely. Oops. Hold on, I went back a page. She found that the medicine did really diminish. Basically, he was actually taking it. But it did not occur to her that the boy was mending the health of a crack in the sitting room floor with it. So she watches the bottle to make sure that Tom's actually taking some and make sure the amount is going down every day. And it is. But what she didn't realize is, yes, he's taking some of the painkiller every day, but he's not putting it into his body. He's pouring it down a crack in the floor. One day, Tom was in the act of dosing the crack when his aunt's yellow cat came along, purring and eyeing the teaspoon avariciously, or like she's begging for it, and begging for a taste. Tom said, "Don't ask for it unless you want it, Peter." Peter is the name of the cat. But Peter signified that he did want it. You better make sure." Peter was sure. "All right, well, now you've asked for it, and I'll give it to you, because there ain't anything mean about me. But if you find you don't like it, you mustn't blame anybody but your own self." Peter was agreeable, so Tom pried his mouth open and poured down the painkiller. So he's giving cough syrup to his aunt's cat. Peter sprang a couple of yards in the air and then delivered a war whoop and set off round and round the room, banging against furniture, upsetting flower pots, and making general havoc. Next, he rose on his hind feet and pranced around in a frenzy of enjoyment, with his head over his shoulder and his voice proclaiming his unappeasable happiness. Then he went tearing around the house again, spreading chaos and destruction in his path. Aunt Polly entered in time to see him throw a few double somersets, or somersaults, deliver a final mighty hoorah, and sail through the open window, carrying the rest of the flower pots with him. So, in a word, the cat goes crazy. The old lady stood petrified with astonishment, peering over her glasses. Tom lay on the floor, expiring with laughter. Tom, what on earth ails that cat? Well, I don't know, Aunt, gasped the boy. Why, I never seen anything like it. What did make him act so? Indeed, I don't know, Aunt Polly. Cats always act so when they're having a good time. They do they? She's starting to. There was something in the tone that made Tom apprehensive. She's starting to think, that cat didn't just act that way on his own. Well, yes'm. That is, I believe they do. Oh, you do? Yes'm. The old lady was bending down, Tom watching with interest emphasized by anxiety. Too late he divined her drift. The handle of the telltale teaspoon was visible under the bed valance. Aunt Polly took it up, held it up. Tom winced and dropped his eyes. Aunt Polly raised him by the usual handle, his ear, of course, and cracked his head soundly with her thimble. Didn't really crack his head, but kind of whacked him on the head, almost as like a spanking. Now, sir, what did you want to treat that poor dumb beast so for? Well, I've done it out of pity for him, 'cause he ain't got no aunt. Hadn't any aunt? You numbskull. What has that got to do with it? Well, heaps. Because if he'd had an aunt, she'd have burned him out herself. She'd have roasted his bowels out of him without any more feeling than if he was a human. Okay, so let's talk about what he means here. He says, I did it for the cat because he doesn't have an aunt. And then Aunt Polly's like, well, who cares if he doesn't have an aunt? What does that mean you got to give him painkiller for? And he says, well, if Peter had had his own aunt, she would have been giving him painkiller herself. She'd have roasted his bowels, that means like his intestines, out of him without any more feeling than if he was a human. He's like, he doesn't have an aunt to torture him with painkillers and all kinds of weird quack medicines like what you've been doing to me. Aunt Polly felt a sudden pang of remorse. This was putting the thing in a new light. What was cruelty to a cat might be cruelty to a boy, too. She began to soften. She felt sorry. Her eyes watered a little, and she put her hand on Tom's head and said gently, I was meaning for the best, Tom. And Tom, it did do you good. She's like, now she realizes, you know what? If that cat was miserable from the painkiller, I bet Tom was too. I'm feeling kind of bad now. Tom looked up in her face with just a perceptible twinkle peeping through his gravity. I know he was meaning for the best auntie, and so was I with Peter. It done him good too, for I've never seen him get around so since. I'll go along with you, Tom, before you aggravate me again. And you try and see if you can be a good boy for once, and you needn't take any more medicine. Tom reached school ahead of time. It was noticed that this strange thing had been occurring every day latterly. And now, as usual of late, he hung about the gate of the schoolyard instead of playing with his own comrades. He was sick, he said, and he looked it. He tried to seem to be looking everywhere but whither he really was looking, down the road. So why is he hanging out by the gate, always looking down the road? Because he's trying to see if Becky's going to come to school. Presently, Jeff Thatcher hovered in sight, and Tom's face lighted. He gazed a moment, and then turned sorrowfully away. When Jeff arrived, Tom accosted him, and led up warily to opportunities for remark about Becky, but the giddy lad never could see the bait. Tom watched and watched, hoping whenever a frisking frock came in sight, and hating the owner of it as soon as he saw that she was not the right one. At last, frocks, or dresses, indicating that those coming up the hill were girls, ceased to appear, and he dropped hopelessly into the dumps. He entered the empty schoolhouse and sat down to suffer. So once again, Becky Thatcher did not come to school. Then one more frock passed in at the gate, and Tom's heart gave a great bound. The next instant he was out and going on like an Indian, yelling and laughing, chasing boys, jumping over the fence at risk of life and limb, throwing handsprings, standing on his head, doing all the heroic things he could conceive of, and keeping a furtive eye out all the while to see if Becky Thatcher was noticing. But she seemed to be unconscious of it all. She never even looked. Could it be possible that she wasn't aware that he was there? He carried his exploits to her immediate vicinity. He's like, okay, well, I'm going to get a little bit closer. Maybe she'll see me then. He came war whooping around, snatched a boy's cap, hurled it to the roof of the schoolhouse, broke through a group of boys, tumbling them in every direction, and fell, sprawling himself, under Becky's nose, almost upsetting her, almost knocking her over. And she turned with her nose in the air, and he heard her say, some people think they're mighty smart, always showing off. Tom's cheeks burned. Why? Because he was embarrassed. He gathered himself up and sneaked off, crushed and crestfallen. Poor Tom. He's been working so hard to earn her attention. He shows off, and all of a sudden, and all she does is say, some people think they're mighty smart, always showing off. So clearly there is still trouble on, Love Row. And we'll move on